The sun was setting behind the dry hills of Arizona, painting the land in shades of orange and gold. The wind carried dust across the open plains, whispering through the tall grass. It was a quiet evening, the kind that made people pause and listen to their own hearts. That was when a young woman stumbled down a lonely trail, her clothes torn, her feet bare, her face pale with fear and exhaustion. Her name was Elena, a girl from a small Apache camp not far from the river. She had run away, not because she wanted freedom or adventure, but because her life depended on it. She had been accused of betraying her people, of breaking a promise she never even made. The elders had turned their backs on her, and her own kin refused to listen to her cries. She had only one thought in her mind: to survive. She walked for hours under the burning sun, her throat dry and her body trembling. Her legs felt weak, but her will kept her going. She had heard there were ranches on the other side of the hills, places where men worked with cattle and horses. Maybe, she thought, someone there would help her. Maybe she could start over. Just live quietly, far away from all the hatred that chased her. As night began to fall, she saw a faint light in the distance, the glow of a campfire. The smell of smoke reached her first, then the sound of a horse snorting nearby. She hesitated, her heart pounding. It could be anyone, a kind soul or a dangerous stranger. But she had no strength left to keep walking. So, with shaky steps, she moved closer. Sitting by the fire was a cowboy, tall and broad-shouldered, his hat tilted low over his eyes. He was cooking beans in an old tin pot, humming a quiet tune. His horse grazed a few steps away. When he heard her approach, he stood up quickly and reached for his rifle, his eyes sharp with caution. "Who's there?" he called out. Elena froze, her hands raised slightly. "Please, don't shoot," she said weakly. I just need water." The man looked at her for a moment. Her voice was trembling, her face smudged with dirt, and she looked ready to collapse. Slowly, he lowered his weapon and took off his hat. "You're a long way from town, miss," he said gently. "Sit down before you fall." She did. He poured water from his canteen and handed it to her. She drank it as if it were the sweetest thing in the world. For a few minutes, neither of them spoke. The fire cracked between them and the stars began to appear above. Finally, he asked, "Name's Luke Carson. I work over at the Silver Creek Ranch. What's your story, miss?" Elena hesitated. "My name is Elena," she whispered. "I come from the Apache camp near the river. I had to leave. They said I did something wrong, but I didn't. I only wanted peace." Her voice broke and tears filled her eyes. "I can work hard. I can clean, cook, anything. Just don't send me back, please. I can be a good wife. Just let me live." Luke looked at her, surprised by her words. She seemed desperate, frightened, yet there was something honest in her eyes, something that made him believe her. He didn't know what she had gone through, but he could see she'd suffered enough. He turned his hat in his hands, thinking. "Easy now," he said softly. "Nobody's gonna hurt you here. You're safe by this fire. Eat something and rest. We'll figure things out in the morning." For the first time in days, Elena felt warmth, not just from the fire, but from kindness. She ate the beans he offered and wrapped herself in the old blanket he gave her. She didn't sleep much that night, afraid that if she closed her eyes, everything would disappear. But Luke kept the fire burning and made sure she was warm. The next morning, the sun rose bright and strong. Luke saddled his horse and looked at her. "There's work at the ranch," he said. "It's hard work, but the folks there are decent. You can come with me and maybe they'll let you stay." Elena nodded quickly. She had nowhere else to go. The journey to the ranch took half a day. They rode across open land, past dry streams and scattered rocks. Luke didn't talk much, but every time she stumbled or lost balance, he slowed down and helped her. She watched how he handled his horse, calm, patient, and gentle. He seemed like a man who had lived through hard times himself, someone who understood pain without needing to talk about it. When they reached Silver Creek Ranch, the place looked alive with movement. Men were herding cattle, a few women were hanging clothes to dry, and the sound of laughter mixed with barking dogs. It was a world so different from what Elena had known. Luke introduced her to Mrs. Harper, the ranch cook, a kind woman in her 50s. "Found her out by the ridge," he said. "She's been through a rough patch. Think you can use an extra pair of hands in the kitchen?" Mrs. Harper looked Elena up and down and nodded. "You look tired, dear. Let's get you cleaned up first. Then we'll see about some work." Days passed, and Elena began to find her rhythm. She cleaned, cooked, washed dishes, and fed the chickens. She worked quietly, never complained and always tried to do her best. Some of the ranch hands looked at her with curiosity. A girl from the Apache lands living among them was unusual, but Luke always made sure no one treated her poorly. One evening, as the sky turned pink, Elena stood near the corral, watching Luke work with a wild horse. The animal was nervous, but Luke's calm voice and steady hand slowly won its trust. Elena admired him, not just for his strength, but for his patience. When he finally noticed her watching, he smiled. "You ever ridden before?" he asked. Once, she said shyly. "When I was little," he chuckled. "Maybe we'll change that." That night, as they sat by the fire again, Elena found herself telling him more about her past, about her family, her fears, and her dreams. She told him how she used to weave baskets and sing with her mother by the river, how her father used to tell stories about the stars. She missed them, even if they had turned away from her. Luke listened without judgment. He didn't ask for details or explanations. He just said, "You got a good heart, Elena. Don't let anyone take that from you." For a long moment she looked at him, her eyes glistening in the firelight. "Why are you helping me, Luke?" she asked softly. He stared into the flames before answering. "Because I know what it's like to be left behind. I lost someone once too, and I learned that sometimes giving someone a chance can save 2 lives, not just one." The wind whispered across the plains, carrying the faint sound of crickets. Elena smiled faintly, her heart heavy yet warm. For the first time in a long while she felt seen, not as a burden or a stranger, but as a person who still had a chance at life. As the fire burned low, Luke put his hat back on and stood. "Get some sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's another long day." Elena nodded, but she couldn't help watching him walk away, tall, steady, and kind. Somewhere deep inside, hope began to grow again. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but that night, under the wide open sky, she whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for the cowboy who had stopped to listen, and for the life she might still have. And in the soft glow of the dying fire, Luke paused for a moment, his hat in his hand once more. He looked back at her and thought, maybe fate had its own way of leading lost souls to each other. The morning at Silver Creek Ranch began with the sound of roosters and the soft creak of barn doors. The sun painted the horizon with shades of pink and gold, promising another hot day. Elena woke up early, as she always did now. The smell of fresh bread filled the kitchen, and she moved quickly, setting the table for breakfast. Her hands had grown used to the work, and there was a calm rhythm to her mornings. Mrs. Harper often smiled at her and said, "You work like someone who's grateful for the day." Elena would just nod and reply softly, "I am." Each day she grew stronger. The fear that had once filled her heart began to fade. She still kept her past buried deep inside, but here she had found kindness and purpose. Luke often checked in to see how she was doing. Sometimes he'd bring her small gifts, a blue ribbon, a bunch of wildflowers, or a book he found in town. He never said much when he gave them, only smiled and tipped his hat before walking away. The other ranch hands began to accept her too. They saw how hard she worked and how polite she was. When she sang softly while washing clothes or humming by the fire, even the toughest men stopped to listen. Her voice had a peaceful sound, like the wind moving through the grass. One afternoon, Luke found her by the corral, teaching a small colt how to follow her hand. She moved slowly, her touch gentle, her voice soft. The little horse followed her, as if it understood every word. Luke leaned on the fence, watching quietly. "You've got a gift," he said when she turned around. She smiled shyly. "Animals understand better than people sometimes." Luke nodded, his eyes thoughtful. "That's true. But you're learning to trust again too, aren't you?" Elena looked away for a moment. "I'm trying," she whispered. "It's not easy to forget everything I lost." He didn't press her further. Instead, he said, "You don't have to forget. Just let the good things start to grow beside the pain. That's how healing works." His words stayed with her for days. That night, as she sat by her small window, she looked up at the stars. For the first time, she didn't feel alone under that sky. She whispered a quiet thank you, not just for Luke's kindness, but for the chance to start again. Weeks passed, and the ranch became her new world. She helped cook for the ranch hands, cared for the horses, and even started teaching Mrs. Harper a few old Apache songs. Everyone seemed to enjoy her company, and slowly, the whispers about her being different faded away. But life had its own tests. One day, as Luke rode into town for supplies, he overheard two men at the saloon talking. "You hear about that Apache girl that ran off?" one said. "They say her own people want her back. Something about breaking tradition." Luke froze. He didn't let them see his reaction, but inside, his heart tightened. He finished his business quietly and rode back faster than usual. When he reached the ranch, he found Elena near the barn, brushing one of the horses. She smiled when she saw him, but his serious look made her stop. "Something wrong?" she asked. He took a deep breath. "I heard talk in town and about a girl from the River tribe. Sounds like they're looking for you." Elena's hand stopped moving. The brush fell from her fingers. For a moment she said nothing. Then, in a quiet voice, she asked, "What will you do if they come?" Luke's gaze softened. "I'll tell them they've got the wrong person." She looked at him, tears in her eyes. "You'd do that for me?" He nodded slowly. "You've worked hard here, Elena. You've earned your place. You're not a runaway. You're part of this ranch now." Elena couldn't find words. She turned away, covering her face with her hands. For so long, she had felt unwanted, unloved. Now someone was willing to stand for her, not because he had to, but because he cared. In the days that followed, the ranch grew busier with work. Luke tried to act normal, but he could see the worry in Elena's eyes. Every time she heard a horse in the distance or voices approaching, her heart jumped. Yet she stayed strong. She didn't run this time. She trusted Luke's word. One evening, as the sun dipped low, Luke came to her while she was picking herbs near the garden. "Elena," he said quietly, "I've been thinking. You said once you could be a good wife if someone gave you a chance." She froze, her heart beating fast. He continued, "You don't need to prove anything. You already are. Kind, honest, brave. I don't care where you came from. I care about where you're going." Elena blinked back tears. "Why me, Luke? You could have anyone. I have nothing." He smiled, that gentle smile she had come to love. "Maybe I'm tired of people who have everything. I'd rather be with someone who knows what really matters." She didn't answer at first. Instead, she stepped closer and whispered, "Then let me stay by your side. I'll cook, I'll work, I'll care for your home, and just promise you won't let them take me away." Luke took off his hat as he had that first night and said softly, "You have my word." From that day, their bond deepened. It wasn't a fast romance filled with fancy words, but a quiet, growing love built on trust. Luke taught her to ride properly, and she taught him songs from her childhood. Together they laughed more than either of them had in years. When the ranch owners learned of their closeness, Mrs. Harper just smiled knowingly. "It's about time you found some happiness, Luke," she said. Months passed peacefully until one day riders appeared on the ridge, men from the Apache camp. Elena saw them first from the porch, her body tensed, fear rising in her chest. Luke walked out beside her, calm but alert. One of the men called out in their language. Elena understood every word. He said they had come not for revenge but for peace. The old chief had passed away and the new one wanted to make things right. They only wanted to know she was safe. Elena stepped forward, trembling. "Tell them I'm safe," she said softly to Luke. "Tell them I've found a place where I belong." Luke spoke firmly, his voice carrying across the open land. "She's safe here. She's part of this family now." The men nodded. One of them even smiled faintly and said something before they turned to leave. Elena translated quietly. He said, "May your home always be filled with light." As they disappeared over the hills, Elena let out a deep sigh of relief. She turned to Luke, her eyes shining. "It's over," she whispered. He smiled. "No, Elena, it's just beginning." That evening, as the sun went down, the ranch gathered for dinner. Mrs. Harper made a special meal, and Luke sat beside Elena. The air was filled with laughter, and for the first time, Elena felt peace deep in her heart. Later, when everyone had gone to rest, Luke and Elena walked out to the open field. The stars sparkled above them, and the night air was warm. Elena looked up and said, "When I first came here, I only wanted to live. I never thought I'd find someone who'd teach me what living truly means." Luke smiled, his voice gentle. "You taught me too, Elena. You showed me what it means to care again." She smiled back, her heart full. "Then let's never stop caring." He took her hand in his, and they stood in silence, the stars shining above them like tiny lanterns of hope. The wind whispered softly across the plains, carrying with it the promise of a new life, one built not from fear but from love, trust, and second chances. And as Luke put his hat back on and looked at the woman beside him, he knew one thing, for sure. He had found something worth holding on to for the rest of his days.